to introduce the godfather of data strategy, Peter Aiken.
In China, they start out every speech with a formal bow. So I will start that out. It's a pleasure to be here in Bergen, and also for you to listen to me in English, since I know no Norwegian. I'm going to talk this morning about a topic that is a data topic, but at the same time it's a citizen topic. It's a countrywide topic. And that is that we can't have data literacy exist just within the data community. I have probably the most literate group of data citizens in the country, certainly in the city, in this room here right now. But we need to take what we understand and expand it way beyond our circle, all the way down to everybody who has a rectangle. Because it's a very important topic. So, as Andy said, I have a number of different topics and hats that I wear and things like that. I think the main thing for you all is that I'm the president of DAMA International, which is the largest professional data management organization in the world and loves to affiliate with all of the other local efforts and regional efforts that are going on. I've been doing this for a very long time. It's lots of fun. I think the main thing is that over the years, people have said it's very difficult to quantify these challenges. And my lifetime challenge up to this point is 1.5 billion US. So I can point to very specific data savings that organizations have held for a very long time. So we're going to talk a little bit, first of all, about what is the challenge. Then I'm going to talk about data literacy in particular. And then I'm going to show how the implementation can be helpful in your organizations. I'm going to start off with a little story about Nike. Perhaps you've heard of this company.
When Zion Williamson's Nike sneaker busted open on the court less than a minute into Duke's Wednesday night game, the star forward went down hard. And so did Nike. The company's stock sliding on the news, closing the day down nearly a point, losing an estimated $1 billion in value.
Imagine you, if you will, you are a manufacturing product company that makes very fine products. And your star basketball player is excited because tonight is the night he's going to show off his brand new Nike Zion Williams sneakers. My name on it, right? And he gets on the floor, and within 2 minutes of being on the floor, his sneaker breaks. Not a good one for Nike, right? So Nike, of course, then says, oh my goodness, what happened? We have a manufacturing quality problem. But of course what it is that it's a data problem. Because they started to look in their organization and say, where is the data that will tell us what went wrong with this sneaker? And they started to look internally at their own organization, interesting. But then of course they find out that it's not as simple as that. And in fact, now they've discovered they're dependent on data from other suppliers that come in. And in fact, it gets to be a very big challenge all the way around. We now get into something called dark data, which is the data that you have that you don't know that you have. So this is a challenge, and I contend that all organizational challenges have a data root cause. The sooner we can get our executives to understand this process, the easier it will be for all of them to start saying to you all, there's a data problem, can you help me fix my data problems in my organization? So it's very difficult to learn under the circumstances when you're responding to a crisis, et cetera, in here. And Nike felt very uncomfortable being dependent on the data of their suppliers because they didn't know the provenance, they didn't know the quality. So it was a very big challenge for them. And it also leads us to understand, too, that I'm a university professor. We're not teaching enough data in our programs, and we need to start when they get a rectangle. As soon as a student gets a rectangle, as soon as a young person gets a supercomputer connected to the internet, they need to become data literate. The reason for that is because for years and years, we've had a situation where IT thinks data is a business problem. And the attitude is, if they can connect to the server, everything's fine. On the other hand, the business looks around and sees somebody with the title Chief information officer and says, what else would they be doing except taking care of my data? And of course, we know if you are a CIO, your portfolio is very, very large, and it continues to expand. So the idea of asking somebody with a chief information officer title to do more with data is a very difficult proposition. Data has fallen into a gap between business and IT, and for years and years it has been a big challenge for us. So our goal as data professionals is to repair that gap, reestablish the harmony between these two areas. Because our organizations, whether we know it or not, are filled with data debt. Now, that's not a very technical term, but what it means is that parts of our data aren't working as smoothly as we'd like them to, making things take longer, cost more, deliver less, and present greater risk. The reason for this is because everybody learns about data in different ways. Just, of course, like the blind people approaching the elephant. People look at it and say, oh, okay, this is different, because they encounter it from different perspectives. In data, it's exactly the same thing. Some of you come in through data warehousing, some of you come in through dashboards, some of you come in through data quality aspects. Data is a complex and detailed topic, as you all well know. Can you imagine getting on the elevator and talking about data modeling with somebody just as a side conversation? At this conference, yes, but outside of that, it's probably not going to happen. And frankly, most people don't have the engineering and architecture background that they need to have. And I do mean that outside of this room. Of course, everybody in here has these kinds of things. It's also taught very inconsistently at most universities around the world. I have no knowledge of your specific topics. I have worked with the universities here and had some papers and things like that. But when we teach data, we don't tend to teach people anything about how data impacts the business. That's the linkage that you all have the skills to be able to address. Therefore, data is not well understood, and we have a lack of standards in these areas. And most importantly, if you think of the work groups in your organization, they have learned data as best they can. Because as a work group, one of the things that defines a work group is the ability to exchange information back and forth. That is data literacy in these cases. But what about the work groups that are not labeled data work groups? People in production, people in sales, people in marketing, people in finance. They don't understand this. So we end up with a situation where we have a challenge here. Your organizations are getting really good at this. Again, outside of your groups, because all of your data, all of your organizational people are working with data, but they're learning how to do this. If the goal here was quality, this individual, Wally Easton, has not succeeded. If his goal was entertainment, maybe a little better, but I probably wouldn't go pay to do that. So you can ask the question, what do we want our organizations to be good at? Throwing pink balls at a piano? And they're doing it. They're doing very creative things. But we need to move them to more standard processes so that we can start to work on it. Because data creates what we call a series of hidden data factories within the organization. That's a term from Tom Redman, another wonderful speaker if you get a chance to see him or read any of his books. Department A delivers work products to Department B. And Department B doesn't want to fix those would really prefer that Department A fixes the things over there, but it's too much trouble, so we'll just fix them here. And of course that works great. Then we go to Department C, and they're now correcting Department B's errors that are in there. And Department B's errors go to the customer. Again, not everybody's happy. So these hidden data factories exist all over our organizations. And when we look at what's actually happening, we really are talking about putting sand in some very fine working machinery. Probably, again, not the best thing that we want our organizations to do. It also makes it a little difficult to account for it because all of these data problems turn out to have multiple effects. One data challenge, depending on what it is, can show up as multiple different operational difficulties in the organization. And remember, non-data people always see a data problem that is filtered through an IT system or a business process, or perhaps both. So fixing one data problem at the center can solve a bunch of data problems on the outside. All knowledge workers have to participate in this process. If nothing else, it's something to blame. So we can have them say, oh, it's a data problem. And that's, of course, where you raise your hands and say, we can help with that because we're data professionals. There's, of course, a huge demand for all of this. There were a number of reports early on that said we need millions and millions of data scientists worldwide, and we're not even close to providing enough supply to meet the demand out here. So we have to have more participation. We have to get to the colleges and universities, but we also, as organizations, have to have programs in place that make our knowledge workers more knowledgeable about data. Everybody wants to do better data analysis. We have wonderful vendor partners that are out there with great tools and techniques and things like that. So would it be okay if your time spent on data analysis was 50% of your time productive? Most of you would say no, right? Would you like to get paid to do half the work and get paid full time? Yeah, that's good, right? It's what's happening out there, but it's not 50%, is it? What are the real numbers on this? Well, it turns out that would be a better number, would it not? Here's the real numbers. Every data scientist out there will tell you that they spend 80% of your time munging the data, preparing it for the way in which the data analysis can take place. By the way, these slides are available to you all. In fact, I actually encourage you to reuse them internally as a gift, right? So take them. If you want the actual slides, email me directly and I'll be happy to mail you the direct slides. When you're making data investments in organizations, I like to say we need a rule of thumb to think about this. I like the character 7 of 9 from Star Trek. I think it was the 3rd version. It's not really relevant, so I made mine 1 in 4. Not quite as interesting as all that. But if somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to invest $1 million in data, usually it's involved in buying a tool. If I'm going to make this successful, what number do I need to invest in the people and process side of things? It turns out the number is, well, not 100,000 if I'm investing $1 million, not 500,000 if I'm investing $1 million, not $1 million if I'm investing $1 million, but $4 million. We need to be able to have support for these tools, because a tool in the hands of a fool, you can finish that particular sentence yourself, right? And if you only have $1 million, then what you should really be looking at is cutting down the technology investment and making sure that you put up on the people and process side. Because while we have this 80% figure that every data scientist agrees with on this, what it means is that if I can take you from only being 80% unproductive to being 60% unproductive, I have doubled your data science productivity. That's a very good leverage point right now. And the challenge is that the skill sets are very, very generalized. There is not interest in these individuals in learning the business, and therefore they're not productive enough. So we can't focus on just one end of the equation. We have to look at the whole picture in order to do this. We've created very, very expensive data mungers, and data munging can be done at a price point much lower than data science. What is a data scientist, of course, you might ask? Well, it turns out the original author of the term data science, a guy named Eric Siegel, says data science is a redundant term. It's like calling somebody a book librarian. Of course, now we're going to have to explain to our kids what is a book and what is a library, but that, we'll get to that. The proper level of looking at this is that data science needs to be brought in by a specific domain. You could be a data scientist at a general level, but if you're a manufacturing data scientist or a healthcare data scientist, now you are much more useful to the organization and can converse with the business and understand the business context in which we're doing this. Because all of this is a big challenge. We want to separate the wheat from the chaff in order to do this. Now, the question is well-organized data worth more? Yeah, I think it is. We can go back to some non-IT goals around this. If I'm writing a book, we know that before IT came along, books looked at this and said, hey, I don't want to just hand pieces of paper to people. I'm going to put them in order. I'm going to put a table of contents on it. I'm going to put an index on it. All the things we need to make the book useful in order to do this. If you are an information architect, this author here, Abby Covert, has a wonderful book on explaining information architecture to a non-IT person. And it's available on the Kindle subscription thing, which means you can get a copy of it for free. Of course, if I take the pieces off the back of the book, remove the pages, table contents and everything, all that data disappears, which means you're back to the guy throwing pink balls at the piano, trying to figure out how to work all of this. So better organized data, more valuable, absolutely. 80% of the data in your organization is rot. Now that's terrible. I come from a long distance to tell you your data is rot, right? Rot is an acronym. It means data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. That's not data that we should be paying a lot of attention to. Most enterprise data is never analyzed, and the only argument I've ever gotten in 40 years of doing this is it's not 80% at our organization, it's 85%, or sometimes even 90% when you look at that. So we have to look at this, and who is more qualified to do this but the room of people that I am looking at here in order to see how all that works. 80% of your data is redundant, trivial, or obsolete. 80% of your data is of unknown quality. 80% of your data is standards-free, which means the processing of it is done via spreadsheets or other types of things that are non-governable processes. And your highly paid data resources are spending 80% of their time doing this. So data is the most important asset that we have out there. It's your sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable asset. Durable is a financial term, meaning if I invest more into it, I expect to gain more out of it after that investment. When you compare this to other assets in our organization, these are unique properties, and we need to make sure that we can put them in place. Of course, everybody likes oil, right? But oil is a production function, so I don't like to say data is the new oil. In fact, I think that's really a bad way to think of it, because if it's the new oil, we would only use it once, and data is more valuable when we reuse it than when we actually use it. So I like to say data is the new soil. There's two parts of this that are important. Any gardeners in the room? Does anybody garden? I know we have an apple person in here at least, right? Somebody who makes apple cider, right? Exactly. If you're a gardener, you don't just walk around your yard and fling seeds and hope that good things happen. You carefully prepare the garden. And the other thing is you don't plant seeds on Monday and expect to harvest them on Friday. The joke in Finland is, unless you live downwind from Chernobyl, then you can eat it on Friday. We need some sizzle. We need some way of selling this. This is what data storytelling is all about, and some of you are very good at that process. But data does deserve its own strategy. It needs attention at management level on par with other organizational assets. And most importantly, it needs professional administration. Again, this is the area of expertise of you all in order to keep this up and running. There's a good example on this. We, in the middle of the pandemic, had an article from Forbes magazine, and I'm giving you the references. Whoops, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. There we go, giving you the references for all of this. They valued two airlines, American Airlines and United Airlines, and you can see the numbers here pretty straightforward. American Airlines is valued at $6 billion, and United was valued at $9 billion. But the data in these two organizations was valued at between 20 and 30 billion, and in United's case, 20 billion. Do you not believe that the CEOs of these organizations are doing everything they can to realize that value? Because that would raise their stock price and therefore raise their compensation. In fact, with the value of American Airlines, I suggest that somebody should buy that entire airline for $6 billion, then sell the airline to somebody else for $6 billion and just simply keep the data. Sound like a good proposition? There's a good business opportunity out there for somebody in order to do that. Data is very much like the story of the princess on the pea. Remember, here we have the pea that is keeping the princess up here sleepless. Data errors that get into our production systems cause similar kinds of issues with this. And what that means is that when we look at what's happening there, we lock in imperfections for the life of the product that we have, and it restricts our ability to get further investments out of it, decreasing our ability to leverage our data as an asset in this. 20 to 40% of all IT spending is spent migrating, converting, and improving data all the way around. That's a huge, huge challenge in order to do this. Again, making everything take longer, cost more, deliver less, and presenting greater risk in that organization. I have a case study on this. It's in the slides. You can download it yourself in time. Now you might ask yourself, why on earth am I playing country music? Well, turns out this is a good example of literacy, in this case financial literacy. This is a famous American country music duo. May not be to your liking in terms of the taste, but when they got famous and appeared on a stage in our country that's a very grand stage called the Grand Ole Opry, somebody came up to them and said, "Hey, you guys are famous, you can now deduct the cost of your fancy suits." They're called nudie suits. It's not a bad word. It was the name of the person who makes the suits. And Charlie, who's the one on this side, said, "Yeah, of course you can deduct them, but before you can deduct them from your taxes, you have to deduct them from your income." That's financial literacy at a very good demonstration. We also have different tests that we've performed over the years to say, if you invest 100 at 2%, how much will you have in 5 years? Very simple calculations that, again, not everybody who is financial savvy is literate on that. We also do health literacy. Thanks to one of our presidents, George H.W. Bush, we now have a data standard in the United States where everybody can look at this label and come up with questions. If I eat the entire container, how many calories have I eaten? Well, at least in our country, we have these standard labels, so most people can do this calculation. So we have types of literacy that we're able to bring into the picture here. When we look at our measurements on this, the US government has been doing lots of measurements around this, although not so much during the pandemic, but you can see from 2012 to 2017, the most important thing here is those numbers have not improved. If you remember this period, this was the period when big data was going to solve all of our problems, and Hadoop was going to be replacing all of our production system. How'd that work out, by the way? With no statistical difference, we are falling behind, and that's a huge, huge problem. In fact, what do we teach our knowledge workers about data? Tends to be nothing. So consequently, I contend anybody who is a knowledge worker, who makes money with this part of their body instead of the muscles, they work with data 100% of the time. That represents a very large untapped productivity source. Even worse, however, and again, I say this as a university professor, we've been teaching our data people and our IT people exactly one thing about data for 30 years, which means that IT professionals and management thinks that the only time we need your services is when you're building a brand new database. Of course, there are many parts of your organization, many types of challenges that you can be helpful with in order to do this. And this leads to something I call the bad data decision spiral. If the business decision makers are not knowledgeable and the technical decision makers are not knowledgeable, then that means we make bad data decisions. If we make bad data decisions, that results in poor treatment of our data assets and poor quality data, which leads to poor organizational outcomes. You may have heard the term lather, rinse, and repeat. That's exactly what's happening here in order to do this. Think of it as putting in some good software like Salesforce. Salesforce works pretty well, but if you fill Salesforce with poor quality data, the customers can't tell the difference between Salesforce with poor quality data in it and a bad experience. This is Salesforce's #1 challenge these days, is saying, don't just install the software, and then make sure your data that goes in is of known quality so that everybody can enjoy the use of the software. If we look at statistics, and again, this is another wonderful survey, something from newvantage.com. All of these references are available to take a look at. We've asked the same question to the same thousands of companies around the world, and we say, are you driving innovation? Are you competing on analytics? Are you managing data as an asset? Are you creating a data-driven culture? Are you forging data-driven people? The answer you can see is largely no. And these are from 2023. We've also, at the same time, asked this question over and over, are your problems primarily people or primarily technology? And it turns out, 2018, 80-20. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Are you seeing a pattern? We need to invest more in the people and process side whenever we bring in this technology. And if somebody says, well, who's responsible for this? This is your data governance function. This is the primary function of data governance, is to make sure people understand all of this. Because when we look at knowledge workers, first of all, they're stressed when they have to work with data. You can tell I get excited about working with data. I love doing what I do, and I've got a great job. 33% of knowledge workers' time is spent recreating existing knowledge. That's a frustrating thing. 10% of their time is actually devoted to creating new stuff. 55% would rather do household chores, and more than 50% would rather pay bills instead of use content management and repository systems. Yeah, these are problems. 74% feel unhappy or overwhelmed when working with data, and 33% of them spend at least 1 hour per week procrastinating over data-related tasks. Again, large sources of untapped productivity. We don't see it because we work with data and we understand this, but our knowledge workers who are out there have other challenges. Here's some more measurements around that as well. 14% of young people have a good understanding of how to use data. And when we ask C-level executives, 24% of them feel confident in their ability to do this. 33% are able to create measurable value. 21% say my analytics projects produced valuable insights. And 80% of them are willing to pay me under the table to make them more data literate. Now, the nice part is you can do that to your organizations and say, you don't have to pay me, it's already my job to do this. So talk to your executives. They're not going to raise their hands and say, yes, I'm data illiterate. Just say, I know you are. It's okay. You all are. And we're here to help. That's exactly the role that you have. So when asked to incorporate data, too many organizations think that if I just give you a brand new pile of data, you can do wonderful things with it, right? Well, once again, same survey, even when they're given good data, 48% of them do something else instead of data analysis. I'm not sure what that is, but they do something else. And it's even worse at the executive level. 2/3 of executives defer to their gut instead of actually making data decisions. The second chart is a little harder to figure out. When presented with data, 36% of them find another way. I'm puzzled. And 14% of them ignore the task entirely. By the way, 14% is about the error rate on ChatGPT too. It's the amount of hallucinations that ChatGPT produces when you look at this. So we have a definition of data literacy. I don't find this very helpful. The ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data, which is a very broad challenge. Many people say there's wide variability because the literacy depends from function to function within your organization, what you need to have. And it's not the same thing as a binary task. It's not you are either data literate or you're not. Oops, this may be too loud. We talk here about the word literate. If I was really going to do this, I would probably say you are daterate. Not a good word, right? So maybe we should be proficient in this instead of just literate. Would you rather have somebody be proficient or literate? I think proficient would be good. The British have a term called acumen, which means somebody who has the ability to discern or judge well. And that's what I would like to see of our knowledge workers, their ability to judge well what's going on in their data environment. And yet, when we look at what's happening in data literacy, particularly in the academic community, it really is more a question about, should a data scientist have 2 classes in statistics or 3 classes in statistics? Now, those are good questions, but they're not going to move the needle for our organizations. These are things that simply do not really matter. The material that they're producing is inessential in that. And so we want to change that. This is the reason I did the book in this area. We have 8 billion people on planet Earth. Of those, we have 2.5 billion of them that have a rectangle. Of those that have a rectangle, 1.5 billion are adults. And of those, 1 billion are knowledge workers. This is our target audience in here as a profession. The mobile data spreaders and the adult data spreaders, those are my words for them, are interesting, but they're going to be focused on avoiding being fooled and manipulated. And their behavior is going to be focused on the individual. But once I've employed somebody as a knowledge worker, I can put them under a code of conduct and I can say, we're an ethical corporation, and if somebody is doing something unethical with our data, you need to make it known so that we can stop that particular practice. And similarly, we can force them through codes of conduct and employment agreements to be focused on organizational activities as opposed to individual activities. It's going to be an interesting discussion between whether somebody comes in with a code of conduct and says, I only do things ethically, or something that comes in another way in order to do that. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting discussion as we look at it. There are a number of different characteristics that we have about knowledge workers. These are just some of the labels. And when I say the elevator story, that's the idea of you get in the elevator, the boss looks at you and says, hi, Peter, I can tell that you work for me because you're wearing a badge for my company. What do you do? Now, the easy answer is you say, I make money for you. Good thing, right? But if you don't have a good answer, you've got to explain to the boss, well, I'm working with data and trying to help you leverage data better in your organizations. These are some of the consolidated lists. I'm not going to read them all to you again. You get the slides so you can look at this. And please do, if some of this is confusing, reach out to me. I'm very happy to chat with you about this when you look at all of this. You may have heard of one of our football players who got into a little bit of trouble, and they wanted to get his messages off of his phone. So what did he do? He smashed his phone to bits and said, you can't get access to my messages. Yes, laugh on that one, right? No, of course not. It's all out there. So here's some good questions. Is your organization actually managing data well? Again, I'm not going to walk through these with you. These are checklists for you to use in other areas, but I will tell you this. What if you could take your knowledge workers and save them 10 days productivity a year? Well, it turns out just working with your knowledge workers and how to use their email better can save them 10 days each year. That's an amazing number, and it's very supportable. Knowledge workers aren't aware that all the things that they do are tracked by various log files. But once they find out it's there, when they make a mistake, they now know there's a place they can go back and double check and see what happened to them. Everything digital creates this digital exhaust. I have another talk that I call the 12-step program for organizations to get better. You may have heard of a 12-step program. It's kind of like the same thing. We need to get better about these things. There's things like creating an inventory out of this, having conversations with people. For example, if I tell people in step 4 you need to inventory your data assets, then the CEO says, well, when are you going to be done? Friday? And you can say, Peter Aiken says, no organization in history has ever completed a data inventory. But why are we doing this then? And the answer is, we're developing the capabilities to grab and catalog our data sets. When we get to the point where we're not being productive about it, we're in that rot area. So it's okay that we don't finish our data inventory. Now you have a basis for saying, is this data set that I've just encountered important enough to be included in all of our data assets? And we can produce artifacts, such as this one for an insurance company, that they didn't bother to do everything, but they did find out that if employees understood the relationship and the definitions of these 4 entities and the relationship of them to each other, this was a good thing. And they printed this up and put it in everybody's cubicle so that everybody in the organization was now speaking the same language around these things. There's, of course, a digital reputation that you have to have, and then we have to have ethics in this as well. It's a very, very interesting challenge when we look at all of these things. The Open Data Institute has given us a series of good questions to ask when we're thinking about doing things ethically within data. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But all organizations have these data structures, whether they are business structures, whether they are understood. And most importantly, we need to develop a shared understanding so that the business and the IT folks and the systems themselves are all in harmony in order to do this. Because if we're not speaking the same language, we again go back into the munging part of what we're talking about. The problem is, of course, that while we understand these topics, everybody outside of the room does not. So we may say there's some data stuff going on and we're doing some data management and data governance. And you know what management hears? It's not that we're inarticulate, it's just that it's below the level of detail that they need to understand. So just say, it's part of our data program. It's part of our data program, and we need to make sure that we do this on a regular basis. So the last part in here is about operationalizing this. You guys all know the poop emoji, right? Now the sad thing is, this was a recent LinkedIn posting. Somebody said, I just discovered that if you take bad things and put it through any process at all, you're still going to have some bad results on the outside, unless that process in the middle is devoted to improving data quality. And he said, and this is true with blockchain. Yes. By the way, did you know we've reverse engineered the blockchain so nothing on the blockchain is now secret? Oops. And of course, the realization here on the LinkedIn posting was, oh my gosh, this should be basics. This should be 101, right? For everybody to understand this. Garbage in, garbage out. Garbage data is going to hurt all of our digitization initiatives. No matter what I'm doing, machine learning, business intelligence, blockchain, AI, dashboards, you name it, garbage in, garbage out. And all of these things are happening in your organizations. And more importantly, it's always true. So the first step in this process is to go in and harmonize our data flows. Let's stop paying the cloud vendors money to put garbage in and garbage out. You can save your organization millions by just looking at what's going in and out of the cloud and reducing those data spends in that area. So we harmonize the data flows, we move quality data over there. Now we can start to evaluate what's actually happening. Any other types of measurements are going to be imprecise at this point in time. And it's particularly true in machine learning. Again, one of the hottest topics out there, some really good things are happening in the machine learning area, but machine learning has now gotten to the point where it has run out of steam because the algorithms are called learning algorithms. They need data in order to learn. And if you feed bad data into your learning algorithm, garbage in, garbage out. I'll give you a very particular example. This is my iPhone. Did you know that your phones can now tell animals? Open up your phone and look for a picture of a cat. Did you teach your phone how to know what a cat was? No, but somebody did. So I asked for zebras, which is kind of a hard one. It's a horse with stripes, and sure enough, my iPhone finds some zebra pictures that I have on there. Cool. This next one's a little troubling, though. It also found something it labeled zebra invasion. Now, I'm afraid we may have inadvertently started the 2023 zebra human being war. I'm not sure that's an invasion, but AI labeled it as an invasion. This is a problem. There's lots of challenges. These are standard challenges that organizations have. There's workforce resistance, lack of champions. I'm looking at a room of champions here. How to incorporate new guidance in these areas. It makes people nervous when you change things. So, of course, we have to deal with that aspect of it as well. And then, of course, remember the 80-20 rule that goes into that as well. Organizations are never ready to change unless a lot of things line up. Again, when we look at these various pieces here, what you can see is that this is like a lock and key. Unless all 5 of these things line up, we're not going to have organizational change, and culture is the biggest barrier to changes in IT and particularly in data. So I mentioned before I have this 12-step program for organizations to look at it. It's again another whole lecture that goes on, but they're online if you want to take a look at it. If you really know anything about it, you probably need something more like cognitive behavioral therapy than instead of just a 12-step program in order to do this. It's a tough challenge to change the way we've been doing things for some time. Books, consultants, benchmark training, organizations such as this one, meetings such as this all help. By the way, we've come up in the academic community with something good. We used to call these things soft skills. We now call them transferable skills. Sounds a little bit better as we look at that. And I'll give you a specific example. Pretend for a moment here that the 150 of you that are in this room are chemical engineering PhDs. And you're all getting paid $100,000 apiece. Okay? So there's 100 of you in the room times 100,000. That's a 10 million investment. Everybody with me on the math? Okay, that's a pretty big investment. Do you think anybody taught these chemical engineers what Y2K was? Why would that be part of their curriculum? So this is a chemical company. They're doing all sorts of things. We're producing fuel additives. And when they find something that's interesting, they go into the basement and they turn these engines on and they run these engines for a while to see if this is actually an improvement or not. And these improvements cost them upwards of $250,000 each test. So it's an expensive process. We produced this wonderful diagram that was a process flow for how they do this. They said, stop, we never understood what you do, which is, pretty par for the course. But we had all sorts of things where they were manually transferring data and moving it around on USBs and manipulating it and using different versions of macros in place, lots of tribal knowledge, if you will, in order to put this. And so when we finished with the process, these guys came back to us and said, wow, all of these improvements have made this group, this investment of 10 million, 25 million more productive each year. Those are the numbers we're looking for. By the way, I don't actually believe that 25 million. That seems like a lot, but it's their numbers, not mine, so I was going to leave it around there. You have a challenge. Again, I mentioned before, we can't just give people bunches of new data because data is important. It points to where things are. It has intrinsic value by itself. But in addition to that, we also have to teach people how to use data better. Because data, of course, is what we use to measure, manage, motivate change. And I'm going to tell you a little story about Rolls-Royce here that has a really fun outcome on this. So Rolls-Royce really wants to have better conversations with their customers. They had to change their business model. They went from a product organization to a service organization. They produce, of course, wonderful jet engines that take us safely around the world as we're doing this sort of thing. The old model was, I sell stuff to you. The new model is I'm now going to be on the same side of the table with you, and I only get paid as Rolls-Royce if my jet engine is making your organization money. Everybody understand that transformation? It's a very fundamental piece. And the reason they wanted to do this was because they had noticed something with the racing industry that they thought might be helpful to them. So I'll show you a little bit about what the conversation was. In the old days when we wanted to change a tire,
But Holland comes in for a pit stop. Time to refuel and change tires. Littlemore himself changes the tires. Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's a tense time. Holland stays in his seat, anxious to get away. Let's watch. The tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stopped.
measures, 2 tires changed, 67 seconds. Don't blink. New measure, 4 tires, 4 seconds. That's enough for management to pay attention to this. And these are the kinds of conversations we need to be able to have. Rolls-Royce wasn't able to have them because they thought, you sell us stuff, right? Well, again, they invented this model in 1962. That's an astounding thing. And they've been doing even better with all of it since then. And in the supply chain of doing that change, Rolls-Royce was able to save, again, $1.5 billion. They used to have one sensor that would do this, but instead now they have the ability to eliminate all sorts of things in their supply chain, move all sorts of things around, and get better with respect to what they do. Again, my build is very slow on that one. I'm just going to skip that slide. Oh, that's right. Yeah, new feature in there. So, lots and lots of different topics in here. I've covered a lot, but are you convinced that if we can take our knowledge workers and make them more data knowledgeable, it will be a help to our organizations? Are you also convinced that it will help to show value to your specific operations because you will get the credit for making the organization more literate? In that case, my time is up and I'm done. I thank you for your attention.